It used to be, well, shoot, back in the early 90s, I was an avid offline editor in the Seattle area doing commercials, and I was often taking my Avid sequences into After Effects, and there was not a good way to very quickly take a sequence from Avid into After Effects, and I was always frustrated by that, and I knew there was a lot of other users frustrated by that too. So in 1999, my dad and I started talking about creating a software company together. And by 2000, we were actually hard at work creating a plugin for After Effects that would translate Avid timelines. Since then, we've gotten deep into the Final Cut Pro market, and it's now 2010, so we've been in business almost 9 years. And this will be our 10th NAB coming up in 2 months as an exhibitor. So we've been around for a while doing this thing. And tonight I'm going to show you our 3 products, and I'll whip through it pretty quickly. So you'll see kind of a lot of stuff, but hopefully it'll encourage you to look at our website and keep us in mind should you ever need to translate something from Final Cut to After Effects or to Avid or back and forth and that sort of thing. And if we have any time at the end, I'll try to answer some questions. All right, let's switch over to screen sharing, and let's see, how do I do that? I say share my screen. Right. Don't worry, I'm still just as beautiful, even if you can't see me. And you can still hear me? Magic. All right. So everybody, here we are inside of Final Cut Pro. I'm running Final Cut 7 on this laptop, and I have a 7-layer, 30-second commercial that is, relatively complicated. I've got lots of opacity changes. I have cross dissolves. I have opacity keyframes. I have some text, and I have picture-in-picture type effects. And basically, the idea behind this demo is just to show that in Final Cut, I've built my edit as I want things to be, but I want to use After Effects for my compositing and graphics and animation. It just gives me more control. So in the old days, I would have had to rebuild this by hand, and it would have taken hours. But using the plugin that we make called Pro Import AE, I'm able to export this as a Final Cut XML file and then bring that into After Effects. So first step is to export out of Final Cut, and I just use an XML export, which is essentially just a text file. So the export itself goes very, very fast. Now I switch into After Effects, and from here I use our Pro Import AE plugin, which lives inside of the Import submenu, and select that, and that brings up our file chooser, where I get to select the XML file that I just created out of Final Cut Pro. Our plugin gives you a lot of choices and control over the process of the import. I won't go into all these different things, but just it gives you a way, there may be ways that you like to have your comp come in, and as you use the plugin, you find the ways that are better to work with it. So anyway, all you gotta do is click open. I get a warning about one of my effects. Don't worry about that. And now at this point, the plugin is completely finished. We are left with a composition here in After Effects, which I can double click to open up. And basically, if I expand my timeline view, you'll see here is the same timeline in After Effects that I had in Final Cut. And I'm just going to go ahead and click through here. And you'll see as I do that this looks remarkably like it did inside of Final Cut Pro. Got the text. I even got my picture-in-picture type things. Now I'm just going to quickly show you some of the details of this translation that came through. It turns out that the lady in the upper left, her original shot was not this sort of sepia tone. She was actually a full color shot, but I used a Colorista plugin from Red Giant Software to just colorize that the way I wanted it to. In other clips, I have some sapphire effects from GenArts. And our plugin has successfully translated those effects so that things appear here inside of After Effects just like they did in Final Cut. So this lady has her 2 Colorista effects applied with the exact same parameters. And let's see, this lady here had the 2 sapphire effects. Speed changes come through, opacity changes with all their keyframes. And one thing that's really neat is our plugin actually uses the same files. After Effects is now using the same media files that Final Cut was using. And a benefit of that is that you can now slip and slide shots inside of After Effects without having to go back into Final Cut and re-export, make your changes in the editing system, and then come back. We have a lot of flexibility here. And plus, since they are the original files, these ladies who had the picture-in-picture effect applied, there actually is a scale parameter applied, so I can adjust the scale without having to further degrade the image. So it's a very powerful way to get a sequence from Final Cut Pro into After Effects. And again, this product is called Pro Import AE. This same plugin, by the way, also imports sequences from Avid editing systems. So if you happen to be the kind of person who uses both Final Cut and Avid, this same After Effects plugin can bring sequences in from both Final Cut and Avid. So this was the first product that we shipped in 2001. The next thing we did was a Final Cut Pro export plugin. You may remember back, in the early 2000s, Final Cut Pro was, starting to become known as a halfway decent offline editing system. You couldn't do anything for broadcast with it, but there were a lot of producers who got a copy of Final Cut from a friend, and they were messing with it, and they wanted to know how they could take their Final Cut offline edits into Avid, because at that time, a show that didn't finish on Avid wasn't broadcast quality. At least that's what they would all lead you to believe. So we created a plugin for Final Cut Pro that would take a very complex sequence like this and would allow you to export it to an Avid. And I'm actually telling the story backwards, aren't I? So let me go to Final Cut, and this is the sequence that I want to take from Final Cut into Avid. This particular sequence isn't nearly as exciting as what I'm going to show you the other direction, but you can see here that I have lots of different things, lots of layers, opacity keyframes, I have some markers, and I have some text. Now, like I said, back in the old days, people would just do offlines in Final Cut and take it into Avid for finishing. These days, a lot of times you have pretty good quality media in Final Cut, and you have other reasons to go to Avid besides just image quality. So this plugin is called Pro Export FCP, and it's an export plugin that allows you to create AAF files or OMF files that you can take to an Avid editing system, to Pro Tools, even to Quantel editing systems. And it's got a lot of settings for what you're going to be creating. We do allow you to actually create Avid media from Final Cut Pro, so there's some selections you can make in this dialog. But basically, if you want to take a Final Cut sequence over to an Avid, this plugin allows you to do that. And I have my settings set up right now where I'm actually creating Avid media files from Final Cut during this export process. And it's fairly quick because we're not having to actually recompress the media in this case. This is just DV25. So our plugin is able to take the DV25 Final Cut video essence and put it into an Avid MXF file. So there's no recompression happening. So it's pretty handy. You don't have to create media. You may be doing a real traditional offline in Final Cut where you're going to do a recapture in Avid, and that is an option. And of course, things go much faster when you do that. First, before I switch back into Media Composer, I'm going to go into my Finder, and I'm going to take all these MXF files that our plugin just created, and I'm going to put them into a location where the Avid's going to expect to find them. And so now I'll switch back into Media Composer, and it didn't automatically scan, which it should have done. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to scan the drive. Okay, so now it knows about new media. And now let's go to my Import Here folder, and I'm just going to say File, Import. I'm going to select that AAF file that we just wrote from Final Cut, and it brings it all in. Now, it's important to note that there's no plugin on the Avid side. The Avid has the ability to read and write AAF files, so the file that our plugin wrote just comes straight in. Now I can open up this sequence, and as I scroll through here, you'll see that it looks almost just like it did in Final Cut. You can ignore that media offline slide for just a moment. I'll bring your attention back to it in just a moment. Here we have rotation, position changes, scale have all turned into their Avid equivalents. The markers that I had inside of Final Cut have turned into Avid locators. So even if it was a very long, very complex sequence, it would have come in successfully. There was a title, and the title didn't come in as media, but it did come in as a title effect. So the way we handle that in the Avid is we just have to rebuild the title. And usually there's going to have to be some adjustments made to the title anyway. You'll see that the position was incorrect.